Hello and welcome back to Under Review. I'm your host, Bri Mahn. I hope you all enjoyed the holiday break. The Huskies pulled off 2 wins this week, as well as getting a longer bench, which I think was all on our Christmas list. But they started off with Florida State at Mohegan Sun. It got close in those third and fourth quarters, but they were able to pull off the win. They remained consistent. And I think Dorky Juhas and Nika Mule made all the difference. Dorky Juhas had 15 points, Nika Mule having 12 assists. They were both injured in that last game, so they could not play. So I think their presence was definitely noticed on the court during this one. Then they traveled home to face Seton Hall, a super dominant win for the Huskies. 6 Huskies in double digits. Really good to see how powerful they can be in the Big East. And fun fact, Chris Daly coached both of these games because Coach Rama was out for the flu, and she is undefeated as head coach. And her record remains after those 2 games. So that's a pretty cool record that I hope does not get broken. And Coach Oyama should be returning for today's game against Creighton. But a really notable thing about that Seton Hall game was something that we haven't seen since last season, and that was kind of Caroline Ducharme's magic. We saw the freshman come in this year, didn't have much of an impact in those first couple games, and then once injuries started happening, and the opportunity arose to her, she took it. We saw the DePaul game winner. We saw her go off against Louisville. We saw her get 29 points against St. John's. She really just showed that she was this dynamic guard. And she started off this season injured, and we kind of didn't see it for a while. But in that Seton Hall game, we got a glimpse of what she could be this season. She scored 16 points. And in honor of that, we decided to have on someone who had coached her for 5 years before she even stepped foot on the UConn campus, and that is her high school coach of Nobles, Alex Gallagher. So we're going to get right to that interview now. So today we have on a very special guest, Caroline Ducharme's high school basketball coach, Alex Gallagher. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So basically, first question, after coaching Caroline for 4 years, what kind of player did she come in as freshman year? And ultimately, what do you think was her biggest growth area after the 4 years?
Yeah. So I was actually blessed to coach Caroline for 5 years because she came to Nobles in the middle school and she made our team and was a starter from 8th grade all the way through her senior season. I think and I think we'll talk about later in the conversation that some of that was interrupted at times by a couple of injuries that she faced. But Caroline was one of those kids who was blessed where her older sister, Ashley, who played at Brown, came to Nobles, and she was one of those kids who shot up in height really early. And so she played in and around the basket and then had to make the tough transition to learn how to play 20 feet from the basket. Caroline actually started sort of as a small point guard and then had a huge growth spurt later in life. And so when she got to us, a lot of the great things that you all have seen in her at UConn so far, a lot of that, the court sense, her instincts, her competitiveness, all sort of existed when she arrived as an 8th grader. I think the biggest area of her game where she grew tremendously was she became a much more consistent perimeter shooter. And part of what makes her really special is that she faced a couple of really tough injuries, but the first one that she faced with her ACL, she looked at it as an opportunity to sort of rebuild her shot. And so from the time that she tore ACL to the time she returned from that injury a much better shooter. And I think over time that really played out in a big way. And I think the other area where she grew the most is in her junior year, she became pretty obsessed with watching film. And would sit down with me, would sit down with other members of our coaching staff, really wanted to learn how to most effectively use film to break down her game. She's always been a kid or a young person who wants to be great. I mean, she truly, like any kid who goes to UConn, has a desire to be a champion and probably to play in the WNBA and play overseas. And to her credit, she's always been a humble student of the game who is constantly looking for the little edge that players at her level can get to sort of go to the next level. And so I think those 2 areas, her consistency from the perimeter shooting wise, and also just her understanding of the game, her understanding of her own game, her understanding of her strengths and weaknesses and how to compensate for some of those weaknesses, really grew a lot during the course of the time that she played for us.
So you mentioned those injuries that she had in high school. I know a lot of people are aware that Caroline has already had a couple injuries in college, but I know she was sidelined for a good amount of her high school career, which is impressive that she's even made it to this high collegiate level with how much she did have to sit out. But how do you think it affected her play? And then how do you think it made her a better player?
Yeah. So I'll be totally honest. I don't see any way in which aside from losing time on the court, there are no ways physically or instinctively or anything where the injuries forced parts of her game to deteriorate. I think from the time she tore her ACL, where she started working with members of our sports medicine office, along with folks at TB12, which is just down the street from us, to really work on rehabbing her knee when she was coming back from her ACL tear. In that season she missed for us. She obviously missed an off season of training and playing AU basketball, but she really for us only missed about 4 or 5 games, I think, at the start of the season, and then was back for us for the remainder of the season. Had to work her way back into shape and back into game shape, but by the end of the season was playing at a championship level as a 9th grader and leading us. We lost her for her entire sophomore year when she had surgery on her labrum in her shoulder. And it was during the ACL, she really focused on rebuilding her shot and taking her ball handling to a next level. As soon as you could tell her, the doctors or PT people would tell her anything she could start doing, she would start doing it. Obsessively is too strong, but she can't get enough time in the gym. She can't get enough time out on the court. And if that meant all she could do was form shoot, or if that meant all she could do was set shoot from the foul line and in, the amount of reps she was going to put in, the amount of time she was going to put in was exceptional. And so with that ACL injury, she saw it as an opportunity to grow. When she missed her sophomore year, she really became a full-fledged member of our coaching staff. She would prepare scouting reports on our opponents and deliver them to the team. Even as a sophomore, she would break down film with individual kids, with the coaches. She really wanted to take her understanding of the game to another level. And I think that both of those things, both the way she used the ACL injury and the way she used the shoulder surgery, they just made her a more complete player. And I think you'll see she's certainly working her way back into sort of that game shape now. And there were signs of her, I think yesterday, really starting to turn the corner, given the amount of time she was forced to take off from the surgery she had this offseason. But to me, and I know in a couple questions you're going to ask about watching her play last year, she arrived at UConn able to think at an elite level because of how committed she was during that sophomore year of being a member of the staff and really trying to understand the game better and how to use film to make her a better player.
For sure. So you mentioned it. Last season, Caroline kind of came out, saved the day when everyone else was injured. And I think a lot of people were surprised by that because people were not expecting her to be this dynamic all-around player who was doing better than even some seniors at that point. What were your initial thoughts during this time?
Not surprised. She's a warrior. She always has been. There's a killer instinct to her that drives her to be great and makes her a really special player. I think she has for a long time on the national stage been an under the radar kid until all of a sudden after her, I can't remember if it was after her sophomore or junior spring, where all of a sudden she shot to like a top 5 ranked kid in the country in the recruiting class. But it took a while for people to really recognize her at that level and that elite level. And to Coach Auriemma and his staff's credit, they saw something in her. And I've been a student, like so many coaches on the girls' side have been, of UConn basketball for a long time. And, when Coach Auriemma says, we do not coach effort and attitude, Caroline's the exact right person for that fit, because you never have to coach your effort and you never have to coach your attitude. She is consistent and solid and hardworking every day. She has a really thick skin. I know it can be really intense to be in that program and there's a lot of pressure, and the coaches put a lot of pressure on the kids, but she likes being coached hard and likes getting feedback and likes being pushed to be better and can take it when somebody's being really tough on her. So I was not surprised to see her playing at that level. I think the adjustment for any kid, and it's probably, I, as her high school coach, probably have times where I'm, almost like an irrational parent. I was psyched to see her get the opportunity. I was sad for why she was getting the opportunity. Obviously, it was a result of injuries, and that's not what you want to see. Um, but she has an innate, intangible leadership quality where she's willing to put people on her back and lead them into battle. And that's who she is and who she's always been. And to me, I mean, we've been really blessed to coach some great players in our high school program here at Nobles. You know, Caroline is one of the most legendary in the history of our program, and there are others, you know, from my tenure of the last 21 or 22 years, but she's as fierce a competitor as I've ever coached or coached against in my life. And there was no doubt in my mind that when somebody turned to her to say, we need you to lead us right now, she was going to be ready to do it because it's how she's built. And when she was in 8th grade and led us to a New England championship, and was a major player on that team, there were times we got behind her as an 8th grader and she led the way. And so that's just who she is. She has that intangible quality that people want to follow her and fight with her and fight for her. So it didn't shock me.
You mentioned that effort and that attitude that Coach Oriama recruits off of. He said after the Louisville game where she took over last season, that she had this attitude of mental toughness that's very rare in players. Do you remember any specific instances during her high school career where she proved to be mentally tough?
Yeah, I would say the best example is our biggest rival up here is Tabor Academy, where there was a young woman named Molly Bent from Tabor Academy who went to UConn probably before your time, Bri. But you know, we've been two of the stronger programs in New England, and we compete and we're our intense rivals, but have a lot of respect for each other. In in Caroline's 8th grade year, there was a moment we were playing them in the semifinals leading to the New England championship. And Tabor had really taken it to her. She was having a hard time as an 8th grader being out there. She kept scrapping and clawing and everything like that. But all of a sudden, there was this moment. We were really struggling down the stretch. We were down 7 with about 2.5 minutes left. And all of a sudden, you're watching this 8th grader who, in front of a huge packed crowd and a fiery crowd and a lot of noise and a lot of heckling, all of a sudden, the sequence was in the blink of about 10 seconds, she hit a 3, stole the inbounds pass, got a basket and an one, hit another 3, and all of a sudden we were up 2, and this 8th grader had totally turned the game around. And, you know, Nobles fans were chanting, she's an 8th grader throughout the facility. But there was a toughness to her that, despite the fact that that game had been a little bit of a roller coaster with a lot of ups and downs and some great plays and some really not so great plays, she's one of those kids that even when she was in 8th grade, you knew you could stick with her because she was tough enough that she puts the last play behind her. And so I use that as an example, but I would also say there were moments, you know, another great example also against Tabor senior year, it was the COVID year. We only got to play, I think that year we played about 14 games, but none of them were sort of official. And we're a program that's been really lucky to play for a lot of championships, and there weren't going to be any official championships that season, but we traveled down to Tabor in the second to last game we were going to play that season in the COVID season. And all of a sudden we sort of knew. It was so strange, Bri. I've never coached in a higher pressure game that didn't mean anything in my career than that COVID year game, because we had won championships the year before. We certainly would have been in position to win championships in Caroline's senior year, but because of COVID, those weren't part of the mix. And so we went down, and it was sort of, we had dominated everybody else that we had played that season, but Tabor was our biggest competition. And if we didn't win that game, even though it wasn't for a title of any sort, I think we all would have been devastated and disappointed. And our team was really struggling. Tabor was the best team we had played all season, and we did not respond well. We were playing at Tabor, which is a really hostile atmosphere. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves down 12, 14 points. We called a timeout early in the second half, and it was like, is this how we're going to go out with this? You know, and it was a real moment to challenge the team. And what proceeded over the next 10 minutes of basketball was the most spectacular girls basketball I've ever seen played by a kid, by Caroline, in which she ended up scoring 42 in the game. I think in the last 10 minutes of the game, I think she scored 21 or 22 points, single-handedly put us on her back, was bombing from 25 or 26 feet. Everything that left her hand was going in. And so I bookend those examples. In 8th grade, she showed the qualities that Coach Oriama really saw. By the time she was a senior, she was a full-blown leader who had put in all the work to take over a game at any time. And I use those as two examples, as bookends of quite how mentally strong and tough the kid was. She knows the moments when she needs to dig in and take over. And she doesn't look for them for any sort of praise. She just does it because the team needs her to. And I think one thing I'll say, and I have a feeling that the folks at UConn know this, I've coached a long time. There are very few kids who are better teammates, better sisters to the people that she's in the program with. She's an exceptional human being from an exceptional family, who does everything that she does, certainly self-motivated, but mostly motivated by the people that she loves and cares about, that she wants to make proud and she wants to help succeed. And that's what makes her pretty special.
Is there a specific moment throughout her college career so far that you've watched and just been particularly proud of her more than others?
Well, I mean, there have been a million times I've been really proud of her, but I would say the proudest I have been was actually in a UConn loss. You talked about the roller coaster, the sort of moment last season where she had to step up and put everybody on her back and lead the way. But then, of course, people started to come back, and because she's a freshman and her role on the team, those minutes started to reduce after people started to come back, and she moved sort of further down in the lineup in terms of the depth chart. And the time I was proudest of her was watching her playing that championship game against South Carolina, because, to know, not being critical of anybody, UConn was struggling to start that game and seemed pretty intimidated or overwhelmed by the intensity of South Carolina. And in the face of really difficult odds, Coach Oram is able to turn to Caroline and ask her to come off the bench. And I thought she, I'm not saying she was Connecticut's best player on the floor that day, but she was certainly up there. And she showed no fear, and she showed a lot of poise, and she wasn't intimidated at all by the moment. And so there were lots of moments and highlights last year in her freshman year where I was really proud of what she was accomplishing and what she was doing. But in that moment, I thought, to be humble enough to remain mentally strong enough through moving further down that depth chart as people started to come back into the lineup, to remain focused enough, engaged enough that when called upon to really lead again, she was up to the task. That was the proudest I had been of her, because she could have been cranky about it. She could have been down about where she was sliding in that depth chart. She never complained. She and I text all the time. There was never a moment where she bemoaned her fate. It was always what's best for the team. And in that moment, watching her on the national landscape in the championship game, seeing her be as fearless as I know her to be for the whole world to see, I was really proud of her. But what I'll say too, and Caroline will tell you this, I'm a pretty cheesy guy in a lot of ways, and can get a little bit sappy sometimes. But I've been so proud of Caroline for so long that anything she does on a UConn basketball court is not going to make me any more or less proud, or make me love her any more or less. She's family to me for the rest of her life. And I think I'm deeply grateful for what she gave to Nobles in the time that she was here. I'm so proud to have her represent Nobles as a graduate of our school, as she keeps doing the great things that she's doing. But she's a great basketball player. She's a way better person. And so, yeah, there are things on the court that make me proud, but nothing's going to change how unbelievably proud I am of her, because it's a privilege to be part of her life and to have been able to coach her.
You mentioned her moving down that bench, how when people came back, she kind of was on the back burner, but still remained strong. Now going into her sophomore year, she started out injured. She's trying to find her rhythm. You mentioned yesterday, she stood out in that Seton Hall game and just seemed more confident again.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that confidence comes from, and how does it change her game so much?
Well, again, maybe a sappy answer, but the truth is, Caroline and I, we share one bond, which is we're really lucky to have had parents, really great parents. And Caroline's got unbelievable parents, her mom and dad and her brother and sister and her grandfather and other relatives who are a really big part of her life. She's raised in a family where winning and losing doesn't change the way anybody feels about you. And I think that she has always she's always found herself in a spot where she has belief in herself because she knows the people who love her no matter what, and are going to have her back as she goes through it. I think the toughness and the confidence comes from the fact that, the things that matter to her most in the world are the relationships she's built with teammates and family members and others. And, whether she has a good day or a bad day doesn't change any of those relationships. So I think it gives her, a sense of ease when she goes out there that, yeah, there's a lot on the line, but there are a lot of things more important, believe it or not, than UConn basketball or Nobles basketball when she was here, and different stuff like that. So I think all of those things have been a gift for her to give her that sense of confidence. But the other thing I'll say is she, like many other kids on that UConn roster and others, she has put in the work. She is born with a lot of gifts, but nobody outworks her, and so I think even when she struggles for a couple of games, she knows that she's going to find that rhythm again, that those instincts are going to kick in. I think it's a little bit understated what it means to take 4 months off from a sport you play every day, which is what she had to do pretty much when she had the surgery this summer. And it takes a while to come back from that. And I agree with you, what you saw yesterday. There have been moments, fits and starts, where I've seen that level of comfort on the floor when she's been out there. I think the best example, some of her mental strength comes in the Iowa game. She really struggled in the first half of that game, but when given a second chance to come back out on the floor, she was outstanding for the remainder of that game. So there have been fits and starts of seeing the old Caroline who's back in that rhythm and back playing with that confidence. And I think yesterday in the Seton Hall game, you really saw it, and I think now she's just got to put good day after good day after good day together. And I think that until AZ gets back and other kids continue to return from injury, she's going to do whatever Coach Oriema and Daly and the others ask her to do, because, as I said earlier, that's who she is. She wants to do whatever she can to help the team be successful.
You mentioned how UConn's been struggling with AZ being out. Maybe just from a basketball coach perspective, and UConn being ranked 9 this year, how do you think they're going to go into the postseason? I know it's early to predict that, but especially with how much more competitive of a landscape women's college basketball is becoming.
Yeah, I will say it at both the high school and college level, and I have a feeling that the UConn coaches would say the same. I mean, we feel it. I've been here now, the coach here for 22 years at Nobles. I mean, the level of competitiveness in all of our opponents has gone through the roof in the last 5 to 10 years. And so when you see the landscape of women's college basketball, I mean, the amount of elite players and teams that are out there that on any given day can beat you, that list is much, much longer than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So, those are the challenges. I think, you've got a lot of people saying right now, when they're looking, especially at how well UConn started the season, it was, imagine if these other kids were able to play. Like, where would this team be? And I give Coach, and I will say on this video column, I'm a young man who lost his mom way too early in life. And so I will say on this video, I want to send my condolences to Coach Oriema as he says goodbye to his mother. And hopefully he starts feeling better soon, and can get back on that sideline. But what I give UConn a lot of credit for is that they play their tails off no matter who is healthy. They don't make any excuses. And in my mind, I believe strongly that, anytime you lose your top and leading scorer, somebody like AZ, yeah, there are a lot of other great players on that team, but show me any basketball team that doesn't hit bumps in the road when they face that for a period of time. What they've overcome in missing Paige a lot for the last 2 years is a real credit to the coaching staff and to the kids and their mental toughness and their preparation. My opinion is that if they can find a way to get healthier and have the kids who have been growing through this time stay healthy, by the time this season ends, there aren't going to be a lot of people who want to play UConn. No one can predict whether or not, when somebody will be able to return and when they'll be back at full strength. But if they get back to full strength, which would be this year minus Paige and minus the young woman whose name I'm blanking on, who's the great freshman who was there, I think that roster that started this season could win a national championship. But that roster needs to be pretty complete and healthy when they hit the Big East tournament, when they hit the NCAA tournament.
I think it's a great point to make. As much as you don't want injury and adversity, it'll build you to be a stronger team when you enter that postseason, and it'll definitely challenge players enough where they'll have to step up into
Yeah.
those roles. But lastly,
And I would just say, I don't think there's any better example, because I'm really lucky to get to watch every UConn game. Even the example of watching the young Betancourt woman really struggle in the game. And I'm blanking on which game it was now, that they were getting aggressively pressed and she really struggled against the press. She then got 4 or 5 days of practice in her where she's into that role for that time as a starting guard, as a starting point guard. And the difference in that 4 or 5 day window, I think, was, I can't remember who they played before Maryland, but in that stretch, just getting that opportunity and re-envisioning yourself as a player, I think she'll be able to give them solid minutes at the end of the season that maybe she wouldn't have if they hadn't had the injuries and she wasn't forced to be out there to play. So I think it's a good example.
yeah, I think it's kind of crazy. UConn is not allowed to have excuses because there's this dynasty of women's basketball, but to have someone came in as a 17-year-old on the first day of school and is now starting in a UConn game, I think it'll definitely prepare them to be a better team.
Yeah.
It's a crazy storyline. But lastly, is there anything about Caroline, maybe just working with her for 5 years, that fans don't get to see or would be surprised by?
Yeah. I'll do the funny ones that she kills me with. She's the worst dancer I've ever seen. For somebody who has good rhythm on a basketball court, I begged her. There was one time in her freshman year where I saw her dancing in a TikTok video, and I texted her and I said, I gave you one rule when you went to UConn: never dance on video. So so she didn't do it too much, but that would be my funny one. I think a lot of people who don't know her all that well, she's hysterically funny. You can rip on her and she loves to rip back. She loves to tease people, but she doesn't mind getting teased at all. She's an exceptional sister, a great daughter, a really great friend and teammate. There's so many ways that I know on the court Caroline has made UConn proud since she arrived there. I hope anybody who's graduated from the program or anybody who's graduated from the school that watches this conversation, what they can be assured of is that behind the scenes, what she's doing will make people even prouder. And so, I think she's devoted to service in a lot of ways. She's devoted to the people in her life. She's devoted to her teammates. And I think that, she's a person who for the rest of her life will make UConn really proud that she wore their uniform.
I think she's an exceptional player.
Yeah.
I think she has an even brighter future, and I think you played a great role in the player she's become. But thank you so much for coming on. You gave a lot of great insight. Hopefully we'll be talking about the postseason very soon. But that's all from me. Thanks for watching.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.